Hello and welcome to another episode of the NK Active podcast. We are joined today by Dr. Ivan Bristow, who is a podiatrist with an interest in dermatology. So, Ivan, firstly, thank you for coming on and having a chat about dermatology, and we will speak in particular about verrucas because I know that's a particular interest of yours and a particular treatment method that we've just got in clinic. But just give us a brief background journey about your journey in podiatry so far.
Okay, I've been a podiatrist for about 33 years, but most of that time I've worked in dermatology, I would say, which is an unusual route in podiatry, because within 2 years of qualifying, I was working a considerable amount of time, initially in diabetes, but in rheumatology, but gradually dermatology took over. Working at the University of Oxford Department of Dermatology. That's where I spent 11 years, learnt a lot about dermatology, learnt a lot about podiatry, and learnt a lot about putting the two together because it really didn't exist.
No, it doesn't, and there aren't. I would say there are not many podiatrists, in my opinion, who have devoted as much time in developing that interest in dermatology. If you're a podiatrist listening, and it's sort of most people, especially in the UK, you say the word dermatology, and most people have heard of the word Ivan Bristow around things. So obviously, we do get a lot of non-podiatrists listening as well to this podcast. So before we go and chatting about verrucas, I think it would be a nice brief overview just to give if anyone sort of sees any sort of lesions or something on their skin they're unhappy about, what are some telltale signs of whether they should go get that checked out or not?
I think, any change that's concerning someone is worth getting a second opinion.
Yeah.
And particularly as we get older, because if you're looking for the more sinister things, of course, the risk of that increases much more as we get sort of 40, 50, 60 plus. So particularly in the older age groups, you've got to be a bit more vigilant for looking for changes in the skin if we're thinking about things like melanoma and other types of malignancies. But in most cases, the issue is that not many people know a lot about dermatology, and I certainly found that in podiatry, which is why I set out to learn more about dermatology. But it's also that in the GP world, that many GPs, not all, but many GPs are not particularly comfortable with dermatology because they don't have a lot in the curriculum. So patients who have skin problems often find it difficult to get the right advice or get access to the right people, and that is the problem. So if you are concerned, obviously your first stop, if it's on the foot or leg, if you have a podiatrist that has an interest, that's good. But as always, if you're concerned about something and it is changing, it is deteriorating, then seek medical advice from the GP and go from there.
And I know that some GP practices are changing it. Some have got some dermatoscopes, they've been given some training, and then they've also then got links where they can take photos and then send that straight to the dermatology department to get advice on whether it needs an inward referral or what it is to try and A, manage things better, but B, also cut down the amount of referrals to try and reduce the wait time to dermatology, because especially in the South Coast, it is trying to get NHS dermatology can take a bit of a while, can't it, to get an appointment sorted?
Yeah, and also changes in the NHS contract with GPs means that you have GPs with extended roles, which are called GIPers or GIPWAs. It doesn't quite work, the acronym, but GIPWAs. And there are GPs who have an extended role in dermatology. So what that means, in your surgery, there may be a GP with a special interest in dermatology. So they will have more training, they may be able to undertake minor surgery, so that facility will be available to you if there's one in your practice. And there's probably about a few thousand across the UK, but it's not often obvious where they are and who they are.
No, exactly, because there's no way of telling whether your GP has a special interest in a particular or done extra training in that area, because you just can't, as a layperson, you can't check, can you?
You can look on the website where it says about us under the GPs. Sometimes it does list their interest, but you're right, it can take a long time just reading through them all to see who's interested in what.
So with regards to that, is that if something's changing or you've got a concern, it's always just seek advice sooner rather than than later.
Yeah, and the main thing is most of these things are treatable and curable if they're caught early. But the big problem, particularly more so with feet and legs, actually, is people just leave them, and they can leave them for months, even years. By which time things have got a lot more complicated, and often makes it much more difficult to treat.
Well, I think it's a general rule in medicine in general. The sooner you can get on top of it and treat something, the better chance you're getting a more successful outcome, haven't you?
Yeah.
So, verrucas.
Mm-hmm.
What is a verruca?
What is a verruca? Verruca is a virus. A verruca is a virus infection that affects the skin and the mucous membranes. Most of us, we think of them as warts, which is basically what they are. They just use a special word to confuse people. Verruca if it's on the sole of the foot, but to all intents and purposes, they are warts. And they affect most of us. I think most of us in our lifetime will have them. Many of us don't realise we've ever had them, but like most things, a bit like chickenpox with another type of virus, that most of us will have it in our lifetime. And then hopefully you get it once and that'll be it. But there are people who tend to hang on to them a bit longer than they should, perhaps.
And I think that's when we then come involved to try and help, should we say, give the body a bit of a kickstart to try and get rid of verrucas. Because it is, what's the treatment methodology? What's the aim of how do we get rid of a verruca?
Well, if you go back in history, most of the treatments that we had, and some of them we still have, are purely what we call destructive. So the idea is if you have a wart, to destroy it.
Yeah.
So it may be with acid. Years ago, they would have even used radiation, gunpowder, nitric acid, all sorts of noxious and probably illegal chemicals these days, but to destroy the wart, to essentially remove it from the skin. But of course, it's an infection. So to get rid of any infection, like a common cold, you need immunity. And often many of these treatments, although they may get rid of the wart, they don't give you any immunity. So when you're re-exposed to the infection, it just comes back.
Yeah.
So where the thinking has moved gradually in development of new treatments has been about using the body's own immune system to target the infection, which is the most effective way of eradicating the whole wart. And if you use your immune system, it's the easiest way, and also means you get immune memory. What does that mean? It means next time you come across the infection, you don't get it again. So you've got lifelong immunity. It's not 100%. There are people who get warts more than once in their lifetime, and people hold them for a long time. But as if you've got that immune memory, it means generally they don't come back. And that's what we're trying to do.
And does that mean, though, if they do get it come back, it may be just a different strain that they haven't got quite as much immunity against?
We don't know.
Okay.
When it comes to warts on the hands and feet, there are about 6 or 7 known, if you like, subtypes.
Yeah.
What we really don't know, because nobody's ever studied, to be honest, is if you pick up a different one or the same one, chances are they're going to be similar. It's just your immune system has forgotten how to handle it, because as we forget as we get older, our immune system sometimes forgets as it gets older, and so reinfection occurs.
So if we say the aim of treatment is to try and promote or induce a immune response, as it were, what sort of methods can we start using to try and invoke that process?
Well, the American model has very much been along the line of antiviral drugs, topical antiviral drugs, and these have shown some worth, and they've been fairly effective, but they're not the universal answer. The results have not been outstanding. So they haven't really caught on much in Europe and the United Kingdom. Other ways of stimulating the immune system, of course, the virus that causes common warts is called the HPV virus. Now, the HPV virus is also responsible for causing cervical cancers.
Yep.
And as we know, there are vaccines available which are highly successful that are given to teenagers that, given at that age, will cover them and give them immunity to about 95% to future development. So vaccination is one route. Of course, the problem is with vaccinating for warts is it doesn't cover that particular strain. It only covers the strains that cause cervical cancer. But no company is wanting to invest in a vaccine because it's just probably not enough money in it. And actually the cost of immunizing the whole population would be immense. So then we're left with other treatments. And much of my research over the last 10 years has been looking at ways of invoking immunity in the skin. And for years, we've been freezing warts. And it's still talked about now how people have their warts frozen off with liquid nitrogen and nitrous oxide. And many people who are listening or watching will probably think that, I can remember that experience as being quite painful. And it is. But one thing it never did, or certainly something that we showed in the research, was it never had much of an effect on the immune system, which is quite surprising because it was used quite widely. But actually the converse is true. If you want to treat a tumour, and a wart is basically a tumour on the skin, a benign tumour on the skin, heat is probably one of the best ways to do it. We're not talking about heat to the boiling point, to vaporize it or to burn it or to scald it or anything like that. Heat, which is maybe about 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees over body temperature. So just above our normal body temperature range is, if you heat tissues, then you get these incredible effects on the immune cells. It's like a bit of a kick up the backside for the immune system.
They get a little excited, don't they?
Yes, yeah, and this is what we found, and we got quite excited when we found this out. We started the research back in 2015 using the microwave device, because what a microwave does, it heats water, and it's a very unique way of rapidly heating skin to bring it up to that temperature of about 45, 46 degrees. And what we discovered using skin models in the laboratory was that even with just a very low level of microwave energy, so just a very small amount of heating, we were able to excite all the cells of the immune system that have been lying dormant for months, sometimes years. So suddenly they all get very, very excited and they start working like they should. And so that was very positive, what we saw in the lab. And then we took it into the clinic to actually give it a trial. And the first trial that was carried out in the UK, we started in our clinic and 2 other sites in the UK. And we managed to clear just under 76% of all our warts in our trial of, I think it's 32 patients. We got about a 76% success rate.
Which in Verruca Treatment land is almost unheard of.
Yes. Yeah, and at that point, you see, that was about 7-8 years ago. At that point, we had a new machine. We didn't really know exactly what settings to use. And of course, time has gone on now, and we've managed to improve on that with new protocols and just knowing about the timing, the right settings. And the latest research, which is coming out, a bit of exclusive for you here, Nick.
Here we go. We love that.
We've got data which is just being published in the United States, which has been accepted for publication. We've got data from New Zealand, which has been accepted for publication, where they've been using slightly modified protocols to the ones we've used, and they've got an even higher response rate in their studies of their patient cohorts. So it's quite exciting times, really. In terms of how this has had an effect, and very, very positive results. So when we started, nobody had been treating with microwave. To date, I think the numbers of people who've been successfully treated with microwave, over 250,000 treatments have been carried out in the UK and now globally, because it's spread a bit like the wart virus. The swift microwave has spread all over the world, and currently Canada, USA, most countries in the world either have it or are going to be getting it.
And the beauty of the treatment, it doesn't matter if you've had a verruca that's been sat there for 30 years. It still has that ability to be treated. The immune system can still be excited, and that can still disappear with treatment. Quite often it's like most things, I suppose it's anything as we get older, it's a bit like exercise. We just can't be bothered or can't get around to it. And the immune system's much the same, so it needs a bit of persuasion. And then it will start to work. So what you find is that, yes, I mean, the oldest wart, if you put it that way, that I've cleared is 32-year-old wart on a lady who was 80. And she thought she'd never get rid of it, but it did take a few more than the usual treatments, but she was delighted because she got rid of something she'd had for 32 years. She said it was more difficult to get rid of than her ex-husband. That must have been saying something. Yeah, we won't go into that. Obviously, get ourselves into hot water. And the amazing thing is that you see the look on patients' face where they come in and they may have a cluster or multiple, and then you sort of treat that mothership as well, that big wart, and you then sort of see the look of face, and then when all the others then start clearing up as well, and that really shows you've got that immune response, because wherever that strain or that virus is, as soon as you've got that immune response, the body will just not just act on one lesion, it will then basically attack every other lesion that is there.
Yeah, and patients, literally, we have patients who can have tens or hundreds of them. But what we don't need to do, we don't need to treat everyone.
No.
We just concentrate the treatment on, generally, I don't treat more than about 5, to be honest, 5 areas. And then once you get the systemic response, of course, those immune cells will travel to all other parts of the body. And that's the other thing. Patients will often say, oh, the warts on my feet are gone, but I had these bumps on my knees or my hands, and they went too, but I didn't actually realise that they were warts, but they must have been.
Yeah.
So they all go together, which is a fantastic result, just by treating a few of them.
And it goes back to that terminology confusion, isn't it? If it's on your hand, it's a wart. If it's on the foot, it's a verruca, isn't it? It's sort of, people can think they're different things, but actually
it's all the same.
It's all the same.
And one of the other things that we've noticed, I mean, the Swift microwave can clear warts in patients of any age, but the data we've got coming out now does show that the younger the patient, the much more effective it can be. So treating early might be the key.
I believe it is even in the All-Day Hospital in Liverpool, in their dermatology session, that they've got some case series in pediatrics on, I can't remember the youngest, I want to say 6 or 7 was the youngest, where they've actually got some really painful verrucas that were just causing a big impact to the child's life, that they've managed to resolve with obviously modified treatment doses. And again, when you talk about that, if you look at some of their data in the doses that they then use in pediatrics compared to adults, and in general, it seems to be a lower dose, so it's more tolerated. But if their immune system's more susceptible to it, you may say, well, they don't need as much of excitement, as it were, to trigger that response.
And it's probably because they're young, their immune system's young, and like you say, they're just more energetic anyway, so it doesn't take
like that
much.
Excitable puppy, isn't it? When you
Yeah, and then many of the patients that we see with children, they maybe have just 1 or 2 treatments, and the warts have gone, but the older you get, the longer it takes, but it still works, which is the main thing.
And the beauty of the treatment itself is that there's no anesthetic needed. You can walk in, walk out, get back to your normal life straight away. It's extremely targeted to a particular area, and it's less than sort of 15 minutes to do, really, isn't it?
It doesn't break the skin, so you don't even need a dressing. The other thing is, unlike the older treatments you used to have, you don't need to do anything to the area between appointments, like rub it with a pumice stone. You don't need any of that. You just leave it and you can carry on with your life. And as I say, it's just much cleaner, more convenient and quicker. Well, hence why they called it Swift.
Yeah. And is it still the typical treatment plan is you give your first treatment, and then your second 4 weeks or a month later, and then your third, and then you review 3 months after that, and then you look and say, okay, where are we at? Do we need a couple of extra top-up treatments, as it were?
Yeah, and for most patients, you can see a response within 1 or 2. You can see it's going in the right direction. You'll see warts don't get smaller, they tend to get thinner. And patients say, they're not aware of it so much. Yeah. Whereas before, they'd notice if they went for a run, they'd feel it. But after they've had a Swift, even after 1 or 2, they would just say, I don't feel it anymore. It's still there, but something's changed, and you know it's on the right track, and it's very likely by the 3rd or 4th treatment that it's going to tip into immunity and it will be gone. And when it goes into that immune stage, it's very quick. Literally within a week or 2, the whole thing's disappeared, and people are always amazed how fast they do go when the immune system finally gets its act into gear.
Well, that's it. As soon as it gets its act to gear, it finds out what it needs to do. The body will act quickly. It's just, it hasn't disappeared before because the body didn't know it didn't register it was there, or the immune system just didn't clock it or whatnot. But as soon as you give the body the information, it will act on it quickly. It's like, well, we don't like this. We want it gone. Let's just get rid of this. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Job done. And move on.
And part of that immune process, as I said, is that as well as the cells which destroy the wart, there are what we call memory cells. So these memory cells store that data so that if you're exposed to that virus again, whether that be when you're going barefoot, your body will immediately recognize it and then be on top of the infection before it gets a chance to start the whole walk process up again. So that's the basis of immunity.
So it basically gives you that sort of first line defense, is it?
Yeah.
As well. And is there any evidence when looking at the number or the size of the verruca as to how many treatments it's take, or is there no correlation?
As I said, we now know that age makes a difference. The younger, decreasing age predicts faster resolution. From anecdotal experience, not research experience, we know older patients will be slower to respond. That doesn't mean so they don't respond. Also, patients who are on polypharmacy. So if you're taking a whole list of drugs, again, that can slow the process. From the post-marketing survey data, which is available on over 10,000 treatments, patients who had known immunosuppressive disorders did show a decreased response, but they still had a response which is much better than what they had with other treatments. So yes, they were expecting a lower percentage of cure rate, but they were still getting a significantly better cure rate than with other treatments.
Well, because always, typically, the immunosuppressed patient is always told, you got to live with these, you can't do anything about it. Or actually saying with Swift, well, actually, there may be a chance that you may not get rid of it completely, but you may reduce the size where it doesn't impact your life.
The other thing about Swift, and this is another, if you like, unexpected side effect, is pain relief abilities. When we did the first Swift study, what patients were reporting even after one treatment is their walks were no longer painful, or they significantly reduced the amount of walk pain, regardless of whether the walk went or not. And then we translated that data over, and this is, again, more data that's just been accepted for publication, where myself and a colleague in the United States have co-authored a paper looking at its treatment in painful corns.
Yeah.
So corns that weren't necessarily able to be cured, but what we used was Swift as a form of pain control, where it's had a significant benefit on reducing the pain of these lesions, whereas the patients were coming every 3 or 4 weeks for treatment. They're able to go months without feeling any significant pain. So that may be another avenue, or will be another avenue for the Swift microwave, is to see it as a form of pain relief in, for example, painful corns. And that work's ongoing, but it's certainly very promising. And
especially because if everyone's had a corn, you know how painful they are and uncomfortable to stand on. And especially if you get verrucas, especially underneath those weight-bearing aspects of the foot, it's sort of like you're just standing on like a small pebble, and there's sort of all that pressure's going through one small surface area, so they're just uncomfortable. And
it's interesting because other microwave studies unrelated to skin have shown that exposing nerve endings, of course, which there are in the epidermis, does have a sort of mild tempering effect, so that they're not so frequently firing. In other words, that means that things get less painful.
Yeah.
So it's another benefit of having Swift is you can use it in pain relief. Of course, the scientific team at Emblation, those people who make the Swift, obviously are well aware of this, and they're looking at all avenues of research in other ways of using microwave for pain control. And there certainly will be other areas there.
And is there any times where Swift isn't appropriate to be used?
There are no absolute contraindications for Swift. The main thing is it's common sense for practitioners.
Yes.
So if someone has poor circulation, then you probably wouldn't want to use it. Somebody has decreased sensation, then that's probably best avoided. As with pregnancy, generally, although it's not a contraindication, it's probably best avoided till after the baby's born, purely because you also get a better chance because the immune status changes as well. Probably the absolute contraindication, if you're treating, say, for example, an area where you've got a bit of metal work in the foot. For anyone who's ever put a fork in a microwave and turned it on, you'll know what happens. It tends to spark and cause a few problems. You don't want to be putting on a metal pin in someone's foot and turning it up because, the patient would definitely feel that. But other than that, I think it's down to the individuals. Each podiatrist can assess their patients and use it accordingly. But in terms of treatment, most people should be amenable to it.
And overall, what's the latest sort of published data on success rates?
Well, the papers which are coming out, they are accepted for publication. We're looking sort of in the 80s.
Okay.
Which is great, because the machine's been out there for 6-7 years now, and people are learning and modifying and so on. When we started, we just had to take a best guess based on the lab work. And you do find that practitioners who use it the most often tend to get the best results. But that's the same with everything. It's like surgery.
It is, yes.
If you treat one thing all the time, you become better at it. And certainly with Swift, that seems to be the case. At some clinics, even saying about 90%. But that's not published research, but that's what the practitioners are telling us.
But even 80% is over 80% in published research for a Verruca treatment again
is outstanding. Yeah. And in terms of complications, which are very, very low, of course, every modality has side effects and complications, and patients will be advised of that. But the complication rates are very, very low. It does mean, coupled with the high resolution rate, it makes a perfect.
Well, we've been using it in clinic and we haven't had any complications, and everyone's tolerated treatment well, and so far getting good results and perfectly happy with the outcome. And when we discuss all treatment options, everyone's just like, no, Swift, because it's simple, it's quick, there's no dressing, has no impacts on sporting, work life or anything. You just get it done, and it's just effective and simple. Yeah,
and that's what people want. They want straightforward, answers to difficult problems, and it certainly offers that. And there is a bit of discomfort involved. I always say it's like your body will feel the temperature change, because microwave can heat tissues within a second. It can spike the temperatures up, which can be a little bit of a shock, but it's rather like sticking your finger in a bath where you haven't run the cold water, when you haven't run any cold water, and it's like, ooh, but it lasts 2 or 3 seconds, then it's gone.
Well, that's it. And typical treatment is that 2 seconds long 5 times. So it's like, it's there, and then it settles, and then you go back again. And so if it is uncomfortable with that heat, it's not for that long.
No. And by the time patients got the shoes on and they're heading out the door, it's
settled again.
Yeah. I know sometimes you get patients who can tolerate a bit more, and that's good, because it means you can get a bit more energy in and speed the process up. But the standard 2-second protocol works for most quite effectively.
And have they published the protocol for the New Zealand paper? You said it, isn't it?
It's been accepted for publication, so it should be out within, well, depending on the publishers, but it's all of these papers, I say, are open access, so they're freely available in journals that anybody can look up without having to pay. And of course, as soon as they're out, they will be available. I will plug my website and say all the data will be on www.foot.expert as soon as it's made available and can be freely shared from there. That's a great thing about open access publishing.
No, I look forward to seeing that, because there is lots of, you say, anecdotal stuff, but as a profession, anecdotal stuff is great. But if you can start getting rigorous published research, that I think just adds another layer of kudos to the whole process.
Yeah, and looking forward to the future with Swift. There was great interest in treating other skin lesions, and at this stage I won't say too much, but there are studies underway. There are pilot studies which have been published. There are many other skin lesions on the feet, legs, and other areas which may be perfectly amenable to this type of treatment. So if we're sat here in 5 years, 10 years' time, if we both haven't retired, it may well be we're talking about using Swift microwave for a whole range of other things. There was a piece in The Guardian last week, just to show you how far-reaching, based on the research that we carried out in Southampton. They've modelled the same response treating cervical cancer using the Swift, using exactly the same device, slightly different mode of delivery, and they've shown that there too it will have predicted similar effect, which is great, because then you're moving into the field of treating things which are considered difficult to treat beforehand, so other types of tumour, for example. But it's good to know it all started with a humble wart, and effectively treating a wart, which has led to all these further discoveries using this modality down the line.
Well, that's amazing if you can get to the point where you start off treating that, what is just a common wart on the foot, and then could actually then go and help possibly treat more complex, more life-threatening tumours, as it were, then that's a massive game changer, isn't it?
And it's not just tumours. I mean, if you look at the sort of areas where the Swift microwave unit has been used, we're talking about cardiology for cardiac ablations.
Yeah.
And other things that are yet untold. It's only 7 years old, so it's not that old. So I mean, it's quite exciting times as more physicians are using this as well as podiatrists. You're finding that they're starting to use it on other things too.
But then also the good point is that the company's willing to help try and get the research done out there so we can actually test it. So it's not anecdotal. It has gone through a scientific process, being ratified, and it's gone through the proper channels, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing I would say about Emblation as a company. They were very keen, although they had the technology many years before it was finally available. They took the time to invest in the research to say, we're going to put something to market, but we want to show you it works first, rather than quite often you see, and you must see this, Nick, you see a new device on the market, the rep will come around and say, have a look at this box, this will do this is for you. Any evidence? No, but so-and-so down the road, they use it and they say it's really good. And you think, that's not, encouraging me to part with a large amount of money to do it. But when you have solid published research behind it and say, well, here's 5 papers, how do you feel it now? That tips the balance. So you can be reassured as a patient that it has gone through rigorous and
I'm only smiling because I've had many of companies approach me about that. When the first question I asked them when they got this almost miracle products that they try and promote, so, well, actually, where's your research? Well, actually, we published, they may say, we published one study in-house, it didn't go through any peer review process or anything like that. I think, well, actually, that's not really worth the paper it's written on, unfortunately.
And the other rule you can use, of course, is when they come in with this box X and they said box X can treat A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and even use K, L, and M, and N. And you think, what doesn't it do? It's the miracle box. But the fact that it treats everything means it probably doesn't.
Yeah. So I just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for coming on and chatting to us. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I would just say that if anybody who's watching this anywhere in the world wants to seek treatment and they're specifically looking at microwave, you can go to treatverruca.com or treatwithswift.com, and there is a button for patient or locator, as it's called. So you can put where you are in the world and it will locate you to your nearest Swift clinic if you're seeking treatment. But otherwise, a lot of this information is available through my website, www.foot.expert, which is all free to access, and many other topics on dermatology.
It is a good resource to go and have a look up to keep up to date with information. Yeah,
and I do believe in free information. You shouldn't have to pay for anything. Good information should be free information, and that's my ethos, and that's what I do.
Yeah, I know. No, I agree. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Many thanks for tuning into this episode. Please do subscribe to the podcast, and if you have any questions or comments, please post them below or just get in contact, and we shall see you on next episode. See you later. Bye.
Bye.